Welcome, everyone. We're so excited that you're joining us today. We'll get started in just 2 or 3 minutes. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you've joined. We'll get started in just 1 minute. Okay, let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to our, excuse me just 1 second. There we go. Welcome, everyone, to this roundtable on supporting small businesses and their workers. I'm David Greenberg of LISC, and we have a very, very exciting group with us today. Kim Brown from the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation, Maggie Clark-Bashiri from Urbane, and Nia Evans from the Boston Ujima project. I'm going to introduce them more fully in a moment, but I want to begin with a few framing facts as I head up research at LISC National, and numbers are one part of what we do. So no matter where people feel we are in the pandemic, it is really worth recalling its incredible impact, certainly on lives lost, but also on the economic front. Small business closures, as everyone experienced, were one of the most visible early pandemic losses. And as with so many aspects of COVID, these closures had a more severe impact on people of color. In the first months of the pandemic, the number of active Black-owned businesses fell by over 40%, and the number of Latinx-owned businesses fell by over 30%, which was about 1.5 to 2 times the overall closure rate. But now in 22, what is becoming clearer is that the effects on small businesses have extended beyond these early public health-related closures, because these years have exacerbated the gulf between large corporations and smaller firms. For example, 2021 ended with S&P 400 companies reporting an almost 60% increase in profits compared with the last quarter of 2019. And in contrast, in April of 2022, about 2/3 of small business owners reported that the pandemic still impacted them negatively, according to the Census's Small Business Pulse survey. Fortunately, the pandemic has also sparked experimentation and extraordinary efforts to support equitable small business recovery. And as many of you know, LISC itself has been involved in this work in many ways. In 2020, we supported 12,000 businesses with no headache grants, about 90% to entrepreneurs of color and 2/3 to women-owned businesses, as well as through the launch of our business development organization network, our supplier diversity and capital access efforts for small business, among many other strategies. So inspired by this experimentation and supported by the Gates Foundation, we at LISC, Melissa Kim, Julia Durante Martinez, Michelle Harati, and Patricia Boltolini, who was the lead author of the playbook when she was at LISC, as well as our partners at Next City, set out to develop a very detailed playbook to document promising strategies that were employed by state and local government. But importantly, these are strategies that acted in partnership with many different stakeholders, from organizations that provide small business development services to CDFIs, to local and ethnic chambers of commerce that represent BIPOC entrepreneurs. And to develop the playbook, we met regularly with public and elected officials and representatives of these various sectors. We also recognize that local governments are not all alike, so we intentionally formed cohorts that represented regional diversity and included large coastal cities, rural communities, small to mid-sized cities, and older industrial areas, and of course, centered racial and gender equity in the strategies that the practitioners nominated to be lifted up. So each of the many case studies that were described in the playbook are framed by 5 core principles. First, intentionality, that is being very specific as to the equity needs of small businesses and who needs to be reached. Second is being inclusive and who is engaged in the strategy development in the first place. And the third is addressing access barriers to the small business recovery program. The fourth step we call leveling the playing field. That means thinking hard about the capacity needs that are required in the deployment of the program. And the final step, of course, relates to measurement and accountability. Throughout the playbook, you can double click on each of the case studies to see how these principles were put into place. So as our panelists are certainly going to reflect, strategies supporting small businesses and their workers pose not just an alternative to inequality in our lopsided economy and a way of carrying the racial wealth gap. They're also a way of supporting establishments that hire from communities who have been excluded from other kinds of employment sectors. Also, it's true that many emerging entrepreneurs are employed elsewhere. So for these business owners, the boundaries between worker and owner are not so clear cut. So for this reason and many others, it really is a win-win strategy to explore strategies that support businesses and workers at the same time. But it's also a challenging one, as small businesses and their owners, by definition, have often been excluded from the resources that would allow them to offer higher wage jobs with benefits. So in the playbook, we explored 3 sets of strategies, or excuse me, 4 kinds of strategies related to this intersection of small business support and workforce capacity that I would encourage people to literally double click on in our online guide, which we'll share with registrants. It's represented by this middle column here. The playbook also addressed access to capital and commercial space affordability. But around this intersection of small business capacity and workforce capacity, we talked about strategies to incentivize businesses to advance accessible living wage jobs, to provide digital skills training to emerging entrepreneurs, to address the role of cities in supporting workforce efforts broadly, and that's because of what I mentioned earlier about the fact that many emerging entrepreneurs are also working elsewhere. And finally, to leverage cities' economic power to promote hiring access. So to frame some of the issues we may discuss today, I'm going to focus on 2 strategies where our practitioner cohorts recommended we focus, which also happen to be in cities where our panelists work, Boston and New York. So one, the High Road Kitchens Restaurant Relief Fund operates across the country, but in Boston, It is a partnership with One Fair Wage, Howard's Kitchen, and the city's small business unit. It focuses on family-owned, immigrant-owned, and BIPOC-owned restaurants with fewer than 25 employees. And essentially it provides grants to restaurants and technical assistance around equity and hiring. And in return, restaurants commit to a higher tipped wage and create a plan for achieving parity among tipped and non-tipped restaurant employees. Overall, what I'd say is that it's a strategy of pairing commitments from small businesses to offer quality jobs on the one hand, and on the other, providing resources to actually help them do that. And that's something that I imagine we'll hear about from the Boston Ujima Project and others on our panel. Second, cities obviously procure services at scale, and they can come to agreement with labor unions and firms that do business with the city in ways that can enhance supplier diversity and also community hiring and job quality. So in New York City, there's an agreement between the Building and Construction Trades Council and the city, which prioritizes hiring from certain zip codes with threshold poverty levels or proportions of public housing residents, and it would be enhanced by legislation that's now under consideration by the state legislature to allow community hiring. You can certainly learn more about it in our report. But the reason that I raised this issue today in the context of this discussion is because scaling this challenging work of supporting businesses and their workers really clearly requires public policy support as well as philanthropic support. And so that's another issue that our panelists may reflect on. So let's get right to our panelists. I'm going to introduce them now, and then we'll get into some questions that we have about this work. So first, Kimberly Brown is a senior program officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She has worked to promote economic mobility through education, workforce development, and philanthropy for over 15 years. She began her career as a faculty member, teaching English language learners at the University of Maryland, and then moved to Montgomery Community College, where she developed specialized employment-focused curricula and programs for refugees and other populations with high barriers to employment, including victims of human trafficking and domestic violence, survivors of torture and trauma, opportunity youth, and re-entering community members. From there, she became Chief Program Officer at DC Central Kitchen, focused on social enterprise models, food justice, and workforce development for individuals experiencing poverty, incarceration, homelessness, and eviction. Kimberly specializes in developing industry partnerships as well as using data to inform workforce development program and to promote investment in frontline workers. Her areas of expertise include workforce development, continuing education, career pathways, and accelerated and contextualized programming. Next, Maggie Clark-Bashiri is research manager at Urbane, which works with community anchors to catalyze community wealth. Maggie specializes in qualitative primary research and using storytelling and iterative assessment to measure and share community-driven impact, most often at the intersection of small business support, job quality, and local production. She supports program development at the business and community incubator Mangrove Flatbush Central, which I know she'll talk about today. She's led projects that include an assessment of Philly's resource landscape for BIPOC entrepreneurs and research on collaboration among New York City small business and workforce stakeholders. Previously, Maggie led housing quality and affordability needs assessment with M&L Associates, and she's also worked on scaling financial empowerment tools at Commonwealth and supported grantees with a nonprofit focused on independent media in Sarajevo, Bosnia, and Herzegovina. Maggie has a MS in City and Regional Planning from Pratt and a BA in International Affairs and Social Entrepreneurship from Northeastern. Finally, Nia Evans is director of the Boston Ujima project, which is focused on organizing greater Boston area neighbors, workers, business owners, and investors to create a community-controlled economy. Evans has an educational background in labor relations, educational leadership, and policy. Her advocacy work focuses on eliminating barriers between analysts and people with lived experiences, while also acknowledging the value of diverse types of expertise in policy. She's co-creator of Frame's Debate Project, a multimedia policy debate program that explores the intersection between drug policy, mental health services, and incarceration in Massachusetts. Nia has a bachelor's degree in industrial and labor relations from Cornell and a master's degree in education leadership with a course of study in leadership, policy, and politics from Teachers College at Columbia. She also studied at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, where she focused on international labor relations. So want to start this discussion with a question about the challenges that's faced in this work. And first, just to give panelists the heads up, I'm going to be encouraging back and forth and for folks to chime in and interact with each other, but I'm going to turn first to Kim and then Maggie and then Nia. So the question is this. So all of you work at this intersection of small business development and job quality. Can you share some of what you've learned about the challenges that small businesses face in being high road employers?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, David. Yeah, I'm reflecting on some of the research that we've supported over the past 4 years that our strategy has been around. And really, it suggests that about 80% or so of all employers think that investing in their lower wage workers is critical to their long-term competitiveness. And many small businesses really are in the same socioeconomic position as their workers. So the challenges are not lack of aspiration or will or desire to be high road, but just real resource constraints and logistical challenges. So I think we all can acknowledge that the small business landscape is difficult, that employers are working within tight profit margins that really constrain their decision making. And with all those challenges that they face, I think we do have we can harness the momentum of that aspiration, I think, though. But carrying out basic business functions like making payroll, those things are top of mind. And so it means that there's very little room to take on risk and to experiment with certain job quality practices that could have a temporary negative impact on cash flow. And there's little time and capacity to make sense of some of the job quality tools and frameworks that are out there. And even if you have access to it, there's little time and capacity to implement those tools and frameworks. I also think that the good jobs field in general might be falling a little bit short in meeting the needs of small business employers. There's lots of job quality definitions, frameworks, toolkits, and things like that, but I think there's not enough guidance on how to make a good job of reality. And where supports do exist, we're hearing that the job quality space often doesn't factor in the realities employers are facing on the ground. I think we have a lot of folks talking about job quality that have never owned a business or never worked with people that really own businesses. So there's a disconnect there. And I think in philanthropy, that's definitely a clear disconnect. And I think we're expecting folks to adopt a whole bunch of job quality practices or different elements all at once when there are little human resource supports to actually do that sort of thing. So I think to sum up, it's hard for small businesses to understand all the different programs and resources that are available and all the rules for all this stuff. I mean, you're trying to run a business, trying to make some money, trying to take care of your family. You don't really have time to do a ton of research on what it means to be a high road employer and how to do it. So I hope that's where we can come in to try to provide information and guidance, all the while focusing on real business owners' needs and their profitability and resilience.
Thank you for that. So not a lack of will, but but resource constraints. The challenge then being harnessing, as you say, the momentum of the aspiration to offer quality jobs, and among other things, making sure that as a sector that tries to support those aspirations, we have people who are really well equipped to deliver the message and provide practical tools. Thank you for those thoughts. Maggie, what's your sense of the challenges that the field may face?
Yeah, just to sort of build on this idea of resource constraints. So, there are a lot of different definitions of job quality and being a high road employer, but one thing we're hearing a lot from business owners right now is this idea of well-being for workers and for business owners. And so an important part of that conversation is mental health, but there's a lot of barriers that workers face to maintaining employment. So everything from transportation, childcare, housing stability, physical health, all kind of captured in well-being. And none of this is new, but the challenges were exacerbated in the pandemic and the rising cost of living and labor shortages in some industries. So, and because small businesses often do hire within their communities, in communities where these challenges are felt more strongly, these small employers find themselves in a position where if they want to hold on to their workers, they have to help their workers address these barriers that are essentially gaps in our social safety net and, in our social infrastructure. And that's a lot for a small business to take on, especially when they're facing some of these challenges themselves. And so I think, we should question how much of that responsibility should sit in the private sector. And another challenge, for small businesses who want to support their well-being of their workers, just, as Kim mentioned, capacity and resources are challenges. So in one sense, that's a reason to support the growth and market access of small businesses. But even beyond that, I think, as Kim said, it's difficult for business owners to know what resources already do exist to support them. So for one example, we convened a group of small fashion manufacturers a few weeks ago to talk about sustainability challenges, and they ended up spending a lot of that time actually talking about their shared challenges in finding and maintaining skilled workers. And they're actually going to continue to meet to discuss an idea of building a program themselves. And so to source and skill workers. So with all the workforce infrastructure you have in New York City, here you have a group of business owners who feel that they need to take their limited time to try to build something themselves because that gap isn't being filled for them. So I think it speaks to a lack of connectivity in the ecosystem to resources that exist, and also a need to design workforce programming in partnership with small employers.
Thank you, Maggie. A lot of important points. And I'm glad that you remind us that, the challenges that community face right now come back to the businesses and the workers, obviously, and not to place excessive burdens on businesses to deal with the lack of a safety net, but to think about the connection between broader public policies that can support workers and make sure that, especially when it comes to access to programs, business needs are taken into account. Thank you. Nia, do you have reflections?
Sure. Thank you, David. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Kimberly. So I'd like to reflect within a very specific Ujima context, just because I think it's a little bit different than a more general context or a broader universal context. So one being that I would say we primarily work with businesses, and very specifically majority BIPOC owned businesses that can actually already be considered high road employers. And so just kind of starting off with that bit of difference. And that's by design. Because when we wanted to create a community controlled economy, part of that was being very explicit and assertive about wanting to support not just majority BIPOC owned businesses, but majority BIPOC owned businesses with positive social impact. So starting off with those kind of two minimal layers of criteria. And part of that process was creating community standards that were derived along with community members that included small businesses, because as Kimberly, I just called you Kim. I'm not sure if it was okay to shorten your name. I'm sorry. But as Kimberly pointed out, it can be easy to participate in this conversation, not having gone through the experience of trying to build a business yourself, but kind of commenting on what's ideal. So it was definitely very important to include small businesses in the conversation. So then many businesses, not all of the businesses that we engage with, but the bulk of the businesses that we engage with, they have to pass that community standard screen. And I'm putting a link. It doesn't look like I can chat to everyone, but I'm putting a link that will go to us that actually shows what our standards are. That cross 8 different categories, and there are 36 standards. And so just kind of want to set up potentially asking for small businesses to do a lot. And it looks like Julie has just dropped that in the chat. Thank you. So within that very specific context, so again, understanding we're dealing with a subset of businesses that have been kind of curated by our ecosystem. We're finding that one big challenge is that people don't know what these businesses do. And so, as I said, they can already be considered as high road employers, but people don't know that. So for example, one of our standards is being Corey friendly, which speaks to not kind of stigmatizing or I'm sorry, not discriminating against people with records of incarceration when considering their employment. And so when we're going through the community standard screen with our businesses, and when they get to that standard, that isn't something that they actively think about, because as Maggie pointed out, many of our businesses hire from our own communities. So that kind of lived experience, that affinity, that kinship is going to keep our small business owners from discriminating against their fellow community members. And so they may not themselves say, oh, I'm Corey friendly. And so what they will say is, I don't understand that standard. What does that mean? But then when we explain what it is the response is, oh, of course we wouldn't discriminate against them. And so I found that's one of the biggest challenges for them. We have another business, Cupcake Therapy. They don't use any plastic containers. And that's something that comes out in our conversation with them. And I'm not sure how much the public knows about that type of work or efforts to pay a living wage, et cetera. So that's one of our biggest challenges. That said, we do still run into, even though it's kind of a carefully curated environment, some of the challenges that Kimberly and Maggie have pointed out. So for example, we do have a lot of food businesses in our network. And one of our standards is that our businesses don't pay a sub-minimum wage, that there is parity, relating to the One Fair Wage campaign, for example. And so we do have conversations with some of our businesses who have to balance wanting to meet that, and then dealing with what the trade-offs would then mean for pricing, and very specifically what that pricing means for different audiences. So understanding that some audiences are fine, they can handle the higher prices, they understand why. Working class communities who our businesses are also interested in continuing to connect with and build and grow with, that's more of a challenge. So that does still go kind of back to, as Kimberly said, the will and the aspiration being there, not a lack of a will or aspiration. But resource constraints, I would say, not just with the businesses themselves, but with communities, specific communities that we would like to be able to provide equal access to high quality goods and services as well.
Yeah, thank you, Nia. So I'm glad you kind of flipped the question in an important way. Part of the work is actually acknowledging the strong practices that already exist among the businesses and communities that you partner with, as well as some of the other resource constraints that make it challenging to, especially when part of the work of small businesses and their community-facing presence is about having prices that working class people can access. How to think about those kinds of trade-offs. Thank you. So those are laying out some of the some of the challenges. Now, want to turn to innovative responses to these challenges, either things that you've seen within your own work or within the field right now that you think are promising, to simultaneously help small businesses grow and generate quality jobs, especially in communities of color. How do these efforts really address those challenges that you've laid out? And we'll reverse the order this time, so Mia, Maggie, and Kim, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you, David. Yeah, this allows me to just continue my previous thought. So I'll start with what Ujima does first. So as I said, we set out to create a community-controlled economy, and so just building off my last comment in terms of really wanting to highlight certain types of businesses, I think that's one of the most important things that we do to be helpful is we uplift our businesses as high road employers, and we take care to really emphasize that part of their work in addition to other pieces of their work. So the way this shows up is we partnered with a podcast called the Moonlighters Club to create a podcast episode for each of our businesses once they join our business alliance, to introduce them to a wider audience. And in each of those podcasts, the focus is on positive social impact, and the focus is on our standards. So there's the usual fare in terms of, who are you, what's your story, et cetera. But we make sure in each episode we highlight the outstanding business practices that the business is notable for. So I think that's one of the way evangelizing, I suppose you can call it. Another thing is we have received some positive feedback from businesses, even businesses who, for example, don't pass our community's standard screen, and we have had a couple of that didn't pass, in that they have been introduced to certain high road practices that they didn't necessarily know about before. So Ujima going through the process of creating community standards with community members, I think a huge value of that process is the potential to introduce businesses to new possibilities that they might not have been aware of before. So again, really kind of emphasizing not a matter of lack of will or aspiration, where there is some knowledge, there may be some resource constraints, and even before that, there just may not be simple knowledge of just what's possible of the different ways to run a business. And so we think that that's huge, just that introduction in and of itself. And then beyond introduction, we do provide technical assistance, not directly. As you are aware, Boston is rich with technical assistance providers. And so what we've done is we've created a technical assistance network where we've done some vetting on behalf of our businesses. And I think Maggie spoke about this a little bit. For a small business owner, particularly in resource-rich places like New York and Boston, it could be a disadvantage because then you have to sort through everything that's available, and that's not that's quite a task. And so Ujima tries to take some of that footwork out of that work for our businesses, and we try to vet for what's high quality and what will actually meet a business's needs. And so what we've done is we've created a technical assistance network, and some I do want to name because I do think they're doing great work here. So for example, Boston Center for Community Ownership, Local Enterprise Assistance Fund, Cooperative Fund of the Northeast, and Commonwealth Kitchen, which I'll end on talking a little bit about Commonwealth Kitchen's work, because I think they do excellent work in and of themselves. So Commonwealth Kitchen is actually a member of the Ujima Good Business Alliance. And as an aside, what I'd like to point out is businesses that we work with are businesses that have to be named by community members. So again, just kind of adding another layer to the notion of what it means to be a high road employer. Commonwealth Kitchen is a food incubator in Boston. It's a member-based organization, and they do really interesting work when it comes to anchor institution work here, which is a lot of us are still trying to figure out the anchor institution procurement puzzle here. But one notable thing that they've done, for example, is they have a collaboration with MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where 3 of their businesses have kiosks in one of their student facilities. And so what that does, it gives those 3 businesses access to new markets without kind of overburdening them with cost of trying to meet those opportunities. So for example, having a permanent physical location, et cetera. They hosted a remarkable food fair or food show where they invited area buyers from local anchor institutions to introduce them to over 100 food businesses in the area. So definitely would like to highlight Commonwealth Kitchen as doing good work to connect their food businesses, which are primarily BIPOC, with new markets and with new customers. And the last thing that I'll say is because they are part of our alliance, we're also in conversation with them about what it looks like for them to develop standards with for food businesses within their membership. So that's an early conversation we're in. And then finally, on the investment side, we are following their lead in terms of what investment that makes sense in food businesses look like. So kind of understanding food businesses have unique challenges and needs. So your typical loan products are not super helpful. And so working with Commonwealth Kitchen to figure out how to balance being able to provide their food businesses with credit history, with capital, so that they can meet new opportunities, but not overburdening them with debt at the same time.
Thank you, Nia. That's incredibly rich, and I'm sure only scratches the surface of the work that you and your partners do. But you mentioned a couple threads, evangelizing, on behalf of businesses, introducing new concepts, and then providing TA through the rich ecosystem of providers that exists in Boston, streamlining awareness of what resources are available, and working through providers that can help others, and working through businesses that help others get access to resources, as Commonwealth Kitchens does, as well as tailoring capital products to those sectors that really need them to be structured in ways that serves them. So great set of things for people to consider. Maggie, thoughts about strategies, maybe highlighting some of Urbane's work or others that you think valuable?
Yeah, and Nia, inspired by a lot of that, but especially about the vetting of resources and making referrals there, because it's really important and really difficult work. There's another organization that I think is a great example of that too in Philadelphia, the Coalition for African Communities. So they become a really trusted anchor among various African immigrant communities in Philly, such that they become like a go-to resource connector for a lot of different things, and including for business owners. And at the same time, they've built up a really strong sort of Rolodex of different resources that are out there that they know can be culturally responsive for, social services, business support, legal aid, and their referrals are trusted. And that's really important. And that's something that we're trying to build also at Mangrove and Flatbush Central. So Mangrove is a business incubator. It's a community development space. So we have businesses growing in our commercial kitchen. We have a design studio and an upcoming body care lab. We also have space for organizations like, for example, Rock Restaurant Opportunity Center to come and do trainings for workers. And we have a series of forums that we're starting there. So people coming together with ideas for how they want to solve problems in communities, or just, connect businesses. So people who are really just solving community problems themselves in this space. So there's a lot coming together in the space. It's also located in the back of Flatbush Central Caribbean Marketplace. So it's a really long-standing Caribbean market in Flatbush, with vendors who have been there in many cases for over 10 years. So one of the things being built at Mangrove is sort of an office hours technical assistance center, and a strong focus for us there is being able to build a really solid resource navigator system being able to vet resources that we're referring people to and make sure that we have a strong emphasis on services that we know are needed in the community because of what we're hearing from people every day who are using this space. So, mental health and well-being, again, being important resources in that network. And then just another opportunity I see in this space is reducing the number of touch points that business owners have to go through to get support for themselves and their workers. So in one sense that the navigators play a role in supporting that. I think another opportunity is to, that's a little lower barrier, is to just incorporate job quality and employer education into existing business development services. So, a number of those classes exist. We have one also at Mangrove, the Community Business Academy. And so just incorporating information about hiring and retaining workers and job quality, ways to ask your workers about what job quality means to them and what kind of resources they want access to. So that's another thing. One of my colleagues is working with Interrise, and they're exploring ways to incorporate this into their Streetwise MBA, I think also with support from Gates.
Thank you. So really, you've helped create a real hub of activity and support that's not only directed to small businesses, but is about helping navigate and streamline access to the services that are most needed, among other things. That's a very exciting work. Kim, you have reflections about what you see as from your perch as promising strategies in the field?
Yeah, so the foundation is currently supporting a number of efforts that I think are innovative and supportive of small business success and generating quality jobs, with a real focus and aspiration to have an outsized impact in communities of color. So we supported a segmentation of small and medium-sized businesses that Urbane did and killed it. So thanks, Urbane. And across all types, I think except for maybe one, access to capital emerged as an important influencer. And so right now we're working with about 10 different CDFIs to integrate job quality in their financing and advising support to small and medium-sized businesses in order to improve worker compensation, advancement, employee satisfaction, basic benefits, other incentives, and some wealth building work. And by building these job quality related services into their existing operating and financial models and sharing evidence of CDFI success in influencing job quality, we're really hoping that these CDFI partners can lay a basic foundation for scaling job quality as a key driver of racial and economic mobility. Another example, I think we're supporting a new organization called the Entrepreneur-Backed Asset Fund, which is another CDFI-related investment, but it incentivizes CDFIs to lend to really small BIPOC-led businesses in impacted communities. And it does this by purchasing existing loans originated from CDFI microlenders and then creating a secondary market for them, which creates new capital for additional lending. It's, I think, super innovative. It's a little complex for me without my financial background, but so far so good on some pretty cool impacts with that and some interesting data that we're able to glean. I also want to lift up One Fair Wage again. I know we've talked about them quite a bit, but I'm interested in some of their work that they're doing to leverage unspent WIOA funds to incentivize businesses to adopt various mobility boosting practices. So the strategy that we have at Gates is really focused on voluntary adoption of job quality elements. Right now, we don't have a set policy agenda. And so because of that, we don't talk a ton about wages, and not that that's the only avenue to wage increase, but I think it's an important one. But we did learn from some of our research that there's a lot of other job quality elements that are important to workers other than wages, like fair and stable scheduling. But no matter what, I am always going to say that money it's never not going to be important. It's always super important. And I don't think you can have a real discussion on job quality without talking about wages. And so One Fair Wage has figured out that some of this WIOA money can be used to subsidize wages. And I think that that's a really cool way for restaurants to feasibly pay more to their workers. And I think that finding out like innovative kind of loopholes, not necessarily a loophole in the law, but just ways that you can use some of the money and resources out there that exist to apply to wages is a pretty big deal. So I think that's an innovative one. And in general, I just think that the workforce system can be better leveraged to improve job quality. So prior to coming to the foundation, I worked at a local nonprofit here in DC called DC Central Kitchen. And this is an organization, it's a cool social enterprise that provides hands-on culinary training for folks with really high barriers to employment, like those that have been long-term incarcerated, long-term homelessness, addiction, those sorts of things. It's got some focus on food justice and really bringing dignified food back to communities and food deserts. And we worked with local restaurants on job quality by using asset framing when talking about our program graduates. So we'd say to these businesses, in order for you to access this amazing talent pool, you've got to have XYZ in place. You've got to pay this much, or you have to have this kind of schedule, or you have to provide access to transportation resources, whatever it is. But I think with that work, we did a good job in kind of changing the narrative about the quality of these workers. And we were able to demonstrate their value in we reduced the time to hire through direct partnership with businesses and also improved retention. And so, grassroots efforts like that, obviously we need to think about how that relates to scale. But I really do think that this asset framing model in itself is kind of innovative, and it's a way to also center racial justice.
Thank you, Kim. That's terrific. And I hope in the sort of more open Q&A session, we'll get to touch on some of these themes. I'm hearing a couple emerge, but especially in the pairing capital access and capital products, with job quality strategies. And there's this question of leveraging the workforce system itself, and community-based workforce organizations who themselves can try to encourage that the jobs that they place people at will be higher road. Great. Well, maybe we can have you continue these thoughts, because you started to allude to questions of scale, and philanthropy is obviously one big part of that picture, although not the only one. Might you reflect on how this challenging and intensive work can be expanded, and what you see as the role of philanthropy and public partners in advancing it. And so there's maybe start with Kim, and then we'll go.
Oh, I'm sorry, was it me? I don't mean to change that.
No, it is you. That'd be terrific. And then I'm sorry, Maggie, keep being the middle child, but we'll go to you and then Mia.
Okay, yeah. As I mentioned before, I think that I see a gap between kind of defining a good job and then implementing real employer practice change. So across this kind of good job space, I think we've yet to see employers incorporate job quality definition building into conversations as real active players and in as meaningful a way as I think is needed. And so the result might be perhaps some duplicative efforts in defining job quality. And then the next step of implementation might fall short if we don't kind of get it together. So I think that, philanthropy and public partners can make some headway by more deeply engaging employers and workers. There's no way, I don't think, for the job quality field to advance unless it's driven by employer needs and perspectives. And so I think centering that perspective is going to be key. And it's something that we feel is sort of our kind of niche area. I think that employer and lived experience insights can really help us as a field. It can help us to prioritize among businesses, particularly industries and types of businesses that are facing the most significant challenges and that employ BIPOC and low-wage workers. I think it can help us to prioritize influence outreach strategies, like I mentioned with the CDFI thing, and where we can kind of create a network of networks approach to achieve scale and become more impactful. And I think if we can really lift up that lived experience and that business expertise, then we can learn from and leverage momentum in regions where job quality policy is progressing. So where we might not be able to advocate for specific policies, maybe we can try to advance some of these voluntary standards in areas where there's some movement. I think it's also exciting to see some of the government involvement and commitment in the space. So I'm sure as folks are aware, this past June, the Department of Commerce and Labor jointly issued a framework of principles defining job quality that incorporate elements of a good job that earlier research that we funded, we hope kind of led to. They've articulated an aspiration that, this framework might be promoted as a shared vision of job quality among businesses, workers, labor unions, advocates, a whole bunch of folks. And so I think that's done quite a bit in terms of aligning the field around what a good job is, and we can move more aggressively into sort of the implementation stage. And I think finally, I think Gates Foundation specifically can play a coordinating role in trying to align the field on a common set of shared goals and measures. We're trying to stand up a mobility alliance. It's a kind of long-term goal, but I think that we can bring more folks together to kind of agree on things and agree on an approach to elevating a job quality standard. We can get somewhere, and I think that's a role that we can play. And I think we can also help to advance some important narrative work. So I touched on what I think is important with the narrative and asset framing and the importance of lived experience, which Nia has talked about. We have a specific narrative change portfolio, and I would really love for us to be able to further engage folks in this job quality space around worker narratives, which can hopefully change the perception of what a good job is and who is deserving of one and how we can move forward together. Because it seems like in this country, when we think someone deserves something, somehow we find the money for it. And so I think we need to change the narrative that these folks are deserving of quality jobs and meaningful experiences at work.
Thank you very much. Maggie, some thoughts you want to raise about scaling?
Yeah, I think it is really important to focus on cross collaboration in these ecosystems. So, you know, even though this conversation has gotten louder, there's still a pretty big disconnect between worker focused organizations and small business support organizations. And in some ways that comes down to the way these organizations are funded. So, you know, the metrics they respectively have to meet are misaligned. You know, it can be difficult for workforce organizations to pipeline workers to small businesses because, you know, they need a higher placement volume and engagement is really difficult. So I think it's important for funders who are interested in this challenge to think really critically about what impact looks like and how it's measured. So job quality is so inherently subjective, and just picking up on what Kim said about the importance of centering narratives to really help define what this actually means. You know, the goals of job quality vary a lot by place, by industry, you know, even by worker, by person. So I think we need to do more to make sure that the impact that we're defining and trying to measure is really defined collectively, so that funding it targets the right efforts. But I think there are good examples of collaboration to build on. So in New York in the past, the city hosted a Best for NYC initiative, which was focused on connecting small business owners to tools and resources to become high road employers. And you know, part of that initiative brought together a community of practice of workforce and small business intermediaries along with small business owners. People coming together, thinking about the ecosystem strategies and policy changes that could help address this gap between the workforce and small business ecosystems in New York, and really leveraging input from small business owners to understand how this can be supportive. And, you know, I think there's a lot of energy around those conversations, and it led to different initiatives among the participants. So, yeah, this cross collaboration, so especially elevating the voices of business owners and workers can amplify the impact of resources that we already have existing too.
Terrific. Thank you, Nia.
Thank you. And actually, not too much to add here, just really underscoring what Kimberly and Maggie have already said. So Kimberly talked about changing the narrative and just talked about narrative a few times, and I would just definitely go back to that and really underscore that. So when I try to kind of do a quick recall of what public conversations are, very specifically about BIPOC owned small businesses, I would say they're still pretty one-dimensional. So they're still pretty like focused on what the challenges are, and I would just say our philanthropic partners, particularly. I don't know too much about our public partners just because I don't engage with them too often. So that's just my own limited experience, I think can be helpful in working to create more multidimensional narratives about BIPOC-owned businesses. And so again, what we've already talked about, and as I've said, for example, within the Ujima context, the wonderful work that they are already doing, and in not wanting to ignore realities and challenges within a frame of in spite of the resource constraints and the challenges that they face, that we have BIPOC owned businesses who again are working to build and grow along with their communities, and are being very intentional about how they are in relationship with their communities and their customers. I think the other thing that I would add to the narrative piece, as I mentioned customers, I think about something that we did with one of our businesses, which is a restaurant that has yet to open, Jazz Urbane. And we actually did a really cool thing where, because they are starting out, they actually have the opportunity to try to build and try to build these practices into their business plans from the very beginning. So also there, I do just want to highlight something that Maggie talked about earlier in terms of being attentive to business development programs and this showing up in the education there. But we actually did an event with the restaurant owners and community members. And the purpose of that event was to say, they're going to be opening a restaurant in this neighborhood. This is Roxbury. It's a Black neighborhood in Boston. It's the center of Boston. It's going to be a sit-down restaurant. Roxbury is facing gentrification and displacement pressures. This restaurant is not going to be cheap. And here's why. And so we did a really cool event where community members had a chance to sample the menus, and they actually had an opportunity to be in conversation with the business owners about the different decisions that they would have to make and the different trade-offs, and where business owners could ask community members, what do you think about these price ranges? Give us feedback on the price ranges. We would like to be able to pay our restaurant workers living wages. What do you think are reasonable wages? And to have that back and forth, because I think the other piece of this, and all three of us have talked about this, in terms of resources of businesses. Our businesses have to compete. They have to compete with everybody else. And one of the reasons that Ujima does a lot of marketing work and a lot of storytelling work to uplift our businesses is to be able to help them compete. And customers and consumers, I think, are a part of this puzzle as well, to understand that they could be evaluating businesses on multiple characteristics, not just price, for example. So I'm searching for the cheapest product, or I'm searching for the most convenient option, but also being able to participate in conversations, again, to understand what's happening behind the scenes, what are the different types of decisions that business owners have to make, and how I, as a consumer or a customer, can be a partner in not just helping that small business thrive, but then by helping that small business thrive, also helping my community thrive as well. And then the second thing, again, not too different, just underscoring, just thinking about TA. So just thinking about more funding for TA. Typically, I understand that for many of our peers, for example, many business support organizations, that's been some of the hardest funding to get. That's loosened up a little bit in the wake of the pandemic. But just when I think of what our experiences are here, we have great TA partners. They're in demand. We have a couple that have waiting lists. And so then I just think probably they could use some more funding just to create additional capacity for themselves so that they can provide more support for more businesses.
Well, thank you. Those are really powerful reflections, everyone. So want to remind folks we've about 15 minutes now for Q&A and engagement with our audience. So please put in your questions for our panelists into that. I'll do my best to kind of synthesize what's coming in and pose it to the group. But before I do that, I think I just wanted to give Kim, Maggie, Mia a chance themselves, if there are themes that you think have come up that you want to amplify or pose to each other, anything anything that you want to engage with each other about before I send some questions your way.
I don't want to pose a question, but I just wanted to kind of double down on, I think what you said in the introductions of, particularly of Mia's background and the emphasis on the expertise found in impacted communities. I don't think there's anything more important, to be honest. And I think that, I'm hopeful that that drives our business engagement strategy, that we're really listening to actual people's needs who actually do the work and know what's up, but it extends into work beyond job quality. Our broad strategy is focused on economic mobility from poverty. And I think that the accessing and lifting up in a meaningful way lived experience in the non-extractive way is one of the biggest challenges of large philanthropy, for sure, but one that we should be really committed to. And so I'm hopeful that there's opportunities for future partnership with folks like Mia and the continued partnership with Urbane, because they lift that up. And without having an ear to that, philanthropy is just operating in a dark room alone.
Great. Anything else from panel? If you can definitely direct the conversation as you like. Let me draw from some of the questions that we've gotten. So somebody in the audience has been interested in the question of one of our framing kind of constructs around equitable small business recovery is this issue of ensuring program accessibility, which means identifying what the barriers have been and how we can overcome them. And the question was about specifically about earned, I should say, through lived experience, mistrust of banks. And from that, barriers to capital access, which we all know are faced to higher degrees by BIPOC communities. In your experience in sort of pairing TA with capital access programs, what have you seen as a strategy to both overcome that trust and provide some additional support, either in terms of alternative lending requirements or character-based lending was mentioned. I know you started to touch on a lot of those issues, but maybe you might amplify about the capital access question.
I'm sorry, David, is this for anyone in particular?
I think to everyone who wants to, anyone and everyone who wants to respond.
Okay, sure, I'll start. So we have an investment fund. So part of the work that we do is provide access to capital. And I would just say we engage with businesses differently, I think, than with more traditional actors. One, as I said earlier, businesses that come into our pipeline, they're coming into us directly from community members. So I think just for us starting that type of conversation with businesses, where we're saying to businesses, you are a business we love. You're a business that has been named by community members as being noteworthy for one reason or another. We're very high touch. I think in engaging with us, the partnership is clear. And I would say it's clear that we're rooting for our businesses. I think some other quick things we don't in terms of kind of our investment criteria and our due diligence, we don't check credit, so we don't use credit scores in our due diligence. The community standard screen is a big part of that. That's the first part. That's actually kind of the first step of our investment conversation. So that could be akin to more character-based lending. We have a pretty close to no collateral policy. I won't say it's absolutely no collateral, but that is some feedback that we've heard from businesses in terms of their experiences with other actors that have not been pleasant. So we've had conversations with our members about that. We're not taking your house to try to get our loan repaid. And our interest rates are pretty generous. So another conversation that we've had with our members is our interest rates are capped at 7%. So our rates are between 4% and 7%. And our terms in general are pretty generous. Our first loan was a 4% over 8 years. Our second one is, I believe, I want to say 5% over 7 years. So definitely very patient capital. So I would say for our businesses, just an all around just different experience than I think the experiences with traditional capital, and definitely the businesses we are dealing with most likely would not be able to access traditional capital. So I don't know if that builds up more trust for traditional capital, actually. But it you know, I think you know, definitely let's our businesses know that they have our trust and that they have community members' trust.
Thank you. So let me pose another question that's also come in. So just reading from it, what solutions, policies, or efforts have folks been able to advance to further support or improve the working conditions for undocumented people, presumably at small businesses? Is that something that has crossed your practices?
I mean, I can jump in and say that what a huge gap that is for us. And an area where I really wish for a refined perspective. I think the closest that we've gotten is work that we're doing with the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And, you know, right now, one fear that I have is that we're like super invested in engaging a coalition of the willing with this voluntary practice change strategy. So we're working with businesses, like I said, that have the aspiration and the will to do right by their employees. And there's a whole host of other businesses who do not. And, you know, I think that the most vulnerable of our focus population falls sometimes into the hands of those businesses. So what's our strategy to deal with wage theft and discrimination and sexual harassment and racism in the workplace, which is so ripe in the domestic worker space? So like I say, thus far, we've done some work with those folks. And I saw that question in the chat, and since it's been posed, I've been trying to think of the name of this organization. I just can't remember it. So if I can remember it, I'll send it out. But this organization that's giving folks an anonymous opportunity to report on some of these egregious violations that I think occur quite a bit more with undocumented folks because of folks taking advantage of the ability that they might feel they have to go to law enforcement or to assert their rights. And I think that's a great way to hold businesses accountable without putting the burden of fighting for the rights on the employee who can so easily become fired. But I definitely think we need a more refined strategic approach to that significant area of our focus population.
I think one thing that I'll throw in just really quickly, and I won't be able to say too much about it, because we do very limited amount of work with undocumented people. But one of our standards is for our businesses to learn about employee ownership, and so I just bring that up just in terms of thinking about the possibilities of broader solutions that can help a bunch of different type of people to also be able to be utilized by undocumented immigrants here. So I just think of what the role of cooperatives, and so the whole notion with cooperatives, particularly not necessarily employee ownership more broadly, but cooperatives particularly, some popular slogans are, there are no bosses or we're all bosses. So in a frame where there are no bosses, then you don't have to kind of worry about that exploitative employer unless you're exploiting yourself. And I think the other thing to note about that, the U.S., as I understand it, definitely in the sector that Ujima resides in, which is the solidarity economy sector, is pretty young in that sector. So there are many other countries that are just a little more grown up. And so then when I think about some undocumented immigrants, and then when I also think about the possibility of cooperatives as a role, there could be prior experience that undocumented immigrants can actually draw upon to start cooperatives here. I would pause there because then I don't know. Then from there, what type of, I guess, unintended kind of legal ramifications cooperatives formed by undocumented immigrants can run into. But it does occur to me that perhaps is one avenue.
Thank you. Really getting some great questions. One relates to benefits, and maybe that can be our last one before turning to panelists for final thoughts. So I'll just read or paraphrase that the pandemic really changed or impacted the size of the available labor force that restaurants are working with, especially. And so in the job offer may now need to include medical benefits. And so the question is, are there programs that are available to help small community restaurants offer such benefits, medical benefits in particular? Or if there's not a particular program that you want to point to, what are some of the strategies that you employ to help small businesses, restaurants in particular, offer health benefits?
So I don't know of any existing programs, but to build a little bit on Nia's last point about cooperatives. So my colleagues at Mangrove are exploring some cooperative strategies for business support within our market. And so looking at things like supply chain cooperatives or administrative cooperatives. And I heard an example from a merchants organization in Philadelphia that they were exploring the idea of forming sort of place-based cooperative around administrative support, including that, so like a sort of place-based PEO, so that businesses in this geographic area, they have something sort of unifying them, can participate in this PEO and collectively be able to provide benefits to their employees at a lower cost. I'm not sure if that's being furthered, but I think it's a really interesting idea.
I might be able to give one example on the health insurance question, or do you want to just call it quits, David? I know we don't have much time.
No, I'm so torn because I know you could provide a lot of information.
It's not that awesome.
Let me give panelists the mic one more time if they have any final things they'd like to offer or reflect on, leave our audience with.
I want to hear Kimberly's healthcare example. That's my reflection.
I'll just go really quick. So I was gonna say this is part of like what I thought was innovative, but this organization, Work-Life Partnership, I think has a pretty innovative model through which employers can purchase for a pretty small fee access to these resource navigators. And those folks then help employees with a whole host of things that the small business owner does not have time to do, like helping them find health insurance, which doesn't have to be paid for through the employer. Things like rental assistance, stress and mental health services, access to childcare, vouchers, and transportation resources. And so I think like applying kind of like a workforce development coaching and navigation model to the business to help them find out how they can pay for those resources is something that can work, where a small business might not be able to afford to provide health insurance on their own.
That's terrific. Well, we are at time now. Incredibly rich discussion. I can't thank our panelists enough. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom, expertise, insights with us and with broader field. As a follow-up, we'll be sending out some resources that were mentioned during today's panel, and wish everyone a good rest of the day and a good rest of the week. Take care.